Welcome to our weekly Zoom news conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, we look at whether there is new hope for immigrant women who are seeking asylum in the United States as victims of domestic violence. For many women victims, migration is the main survival strategy, but the likelihood of finding protection in the US is lower than ever. Last summer, Attorney General Merrick Garland reversed the Trump administration's decision to close the door to asylum seekers on domestic violence grounds. Has that changed the odds? And what are the visa options for abused women in the United States? We welcome 3 speakers to our news conference. Blaine Bookey, Legal Director at the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. Marta Victoria Canossa, an immigration lawyer in Los Angeles, almost half of whose clients are domestic violence victims. And Milagro, a Salvadoran woman who recently won asylum on domestic violence grounds. We will email bios of each of our speakers and the Zoom video after the conference, along with video excerpts done by our partner, Peninsula 350. Reporters, please enter your questions on the chat box. To our speakers, please speak slowly, as I'm doing, for our interpreters who simultaneously interpret for us in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And my apologies, I misspoke, it's Peninsula 360, not 350. Now I turn the microphone over to EMS Associate Editor, veteran reporter and author, Pilar Marrero.
Thank you, Sandy. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being with us again. I'm just going to give the stage to Blaine Bookey. As Sandy said, Legal Director of the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. She will give an overview of asylum law as it pertains to domestic violence and the current situation affected by continuing border restrictions. Blaine, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Pilar and Sandy. It's great to be here. This is my first time with this group, so happy to be here. I also wanted to mention that at our center, we have staff that speak Amharic and Tigrinya, Bengali, Cantonese and Mandarin Chinese, French, Haitian Creole, Spanish, and Taiwanese. So I just wanted to offer that up, that, you know, for our different, you know, language media. Yes, so our center for the last 22 years has been working to advance protections for asylum seekers, opening the door for women fleeing gender persecution, but also a range of other claims. And we do that through litigation, as well as technical assistance and training for attorneys. I know we've worked with Marta before on some of her cases, and attorneys across the country, where we can, you know, sort of track what's happening in these cases. And then our policy and advocacy programs that are advancing laws and policies that are more protective. As Sandy mentioned, women are subject to gender violence, including domestic violence, at alarming rates in countries around the world. That has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And women show up in the United States at our border or in the interior in search of protection. So I'm going to briefly describe what forms of protection are available to women who are fleeing these harms, how do their claims sort of fit in? What were the recent developments of the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, and some of the obstacles that still remain in these cases? So turning first to the forms of protection available to people who have a fear of return to their home country, there are 3 different types of relief that we are called sort of fear-based relief or humanitarian protections. And they stem primarily from the 1980 Refugee Act, which established a way for refugees to gain status in the United States, either through our overseas refugee processing program, where people can apply for refugee status abroad, or our domestic asylum system for those who are at the border or are already in the United States. So I'm really focusing on that second piece, people who are at the border or already in the United States who may be eligible for asylum if they can show that they have what's known as a well-founded fear. So basically a certain level of fear of harms that would amount to what's known as persecution, which is a term of art, and that are on account of or for reasons of one of these 5 protected grounds of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And the acts have to be they have to be persecuted by a government actor or by a non-government actor where their government will not or cannot protect them. So the long story short is that this is a very, very onerous burden for asylum seekers that they have to establish, that they have this fear, that it's for a specific reason, that their government won't protect them. And as you note in that list of race, religion, nationality, et cetera, gender is not included in that list. So it's been a legal debate since the passage of the 1980 Refugee Act to understand where do women's claims fit in. And there's a reason for this. The 1980 Refugee Act is premised on our international treaty obligations following the horrors of World War II in the past and the adoption of the 1951 Refugee Convention. So the convention and the language of who is a refugee, was established right after the war, and at a time when women's rights were not necessarily considered human rights. So it's understandable, who was drafting the treaty at that time, why women's claims and gender violence might not have been at the forefront. But really, since the 90s, there has been wide recognition that women's claims should fit within this broader refugee framework. This is coming from the UN Refugee Agency directly, and then many countries, including the United States, starting in the 90s, adopted guidelines on how women's claims could fit in with the Refugee Convention. Often that women's claims are recognized under the particular social group ground because women are a recognized group in society. I don't think many people would debate that. But also women's claims have been recognized under all of the other grounds as well. A woman might be harmed because of her political opinion, her feminist views, not to be subject to male domination, for example, is a ground that's often argued in domestic violence cases. And so over the years, since the 1980 Refugee Act, since the 1990 guidelines, there have been many cases across the country that have recognized different forms of gender-based violence as persecution. So that might be female genital cutting, sexual violence, forced marriage, honor killings, and also domestic violence. There's a very long history of domestic violence claims in particular, and a lot of resistance to those claims specifically. But the debate was finally settled in 2014. The Justice Department, the Board of Immigration Appeals, sort of the highest, immigration agency in the US, issued a decision that recognized domestic violence as a basis for asylum explicitly. This decision was called the Matter of ARCG decision, the initials of the asylum seeker. But this precedent was very important because there had been this debate, but also was just following this long line of case law that said women could also benefit from refugee protection. Then in came the Trump administration. In 2018, Trump's Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, issued a decision that undid that 2014 precedent that I mentioned, using the case of our client, Miss AB, her initials. She was a Salvadoran, or she is a Salvadoran woman who endured, 15 years of very, very brutal domestic violence. Her partner's brother was a police officer, and he utilized his position to intimidate her. And she eventually left, leaving behind her 3 young children. She was initially found eligible for asylum. And then Jeff Sessions came in and rejected that decision and said she's not eligible for asylum, and also tried to undermine the availability of asylum for all women fleeing domestic violence, but really any form of harm by a non-government actor. So, which in many instances, gender violence is perpetrated by family members or other people in the community. So this decision, this Matter of AB decision from 2018 was incredibly detrimental. We saw grant rates for asylum seekers from Central America in particular, and Mexico, just drop significantly. So this decision really did have a huge impact on a lot of people, and really took the law back to the dark ages, we say, before women's rights were recognized as human rights. And as Sandy mentioned, there was a long campaign from the day that decision issued up until this summer in June, when Attorney General Garland overturned that 2018 precedent from Jeff Sessions. There was a long campaign. This was a campaign promise made by President Biden, and every other frontrunner for the Democratic nomination said in their platform that they would restore protections for domestic violence survivors seeking asylum. So this was a major victory in June when Attorney General Garland overturned that earlier precedent. It just brings us back to where the law was before, but obviously a lot has shifted since then. One important thing to note from that decision is that it also, in that decision, recognized that the administration is currently working on regulations around what is the meaning of a particular social group, because it has been so in flux, whether women should be included, in that ground. Those regulations were supposed to come down tomorrow, according to the executive order that President Biden issued on February 2nd. I don't think that will happen. So we imagine the regulations, hopefully before the end of the year. But in the meantime, the reversal of that 2018 decision was an incredibly important victory. We've seen many cases where a woman had been denied and her case was up on appeal at the Court of Appeals, where now the Department of Justice is agreeing to send those cases back to the agency for another bite at the apple, for new consideration of their case, without this presumption that was established by Jeff Sessions to deny all of these cases with no individualized consideration. So this, it has had a real impact in people's lives already. But I'll just sort of end with the piece that Pilar mentioned in terms of, what are all of the remaining obstacles. That was a huge one, and we're very proud of that victory. And as a community, it required everyone's cooperation over 4 years. But there are still many obstacles in the way, and I'm sure that we'll hear more about this from some of the other speakers. But I'll just mention a few of them. The first is the total politicization of the immigration courts. The Trump administration stacked the immigration courts with restrictionist judges who were almost exclusively prosecutors before, with incredibly high denial rates for women, but for all cases. Some judges denying upwards of 90% of cases. That is not the rule of law. That is not justice. So that is, no matter what amount of reform, short of actually changing the immigration courts, there will always be too high of a hurdle. The second are, just the sort of lack of access to counsel for asylum seekers. This, was exacerbated by the policy that I'll mention, the migrant protection protocols, where people were forced to remain in Mexico while their cases went through. Those cases had an even lower rate of counsel. And we've seen study after study show that access to counsel has a huge impact on whether someone can finally get the protection that they deserve, because the legal standards are so complicated and the evidence that's required is also so high. And then the last piece, before I talk about the border policies, that's kind of the huge elephant in the room, is just detention conditions. The people who've been in detention increased significantly, and it went down in the pandemic, but we've seen the numbers go up again. And detention is just incredibly re-traumatizing and very difficult for people to be able to litigate and win their cases from detention. So all of those things are still in place and very much part of the US immigration architecture that keeps people from getting protection, and has a particularly negative impact on women who are seeking asylum. But the most egregious policies of the Trump administration are still being carried out by this administration, that are having a huge impact on women, and also are just completely cutting off access to the US asylum system for anybody who's coming to the US seeking safety right now. This is including the migrant protection protocols, which I mentioned. And just this morning, some breaking news, the administration did issue a new termination memorandum, which is basically a memo from the Department of Homeland Security terminating the MPP program, which this will hopefully be upheld, and we won't see this MPP or the Remain in Mexico program see the light of day again. We're very, very hopeful for that, because that policy that trapped tens of thousands of asylum seekers in Mexico, where they were subject to horrific harms, hopefully will not see the light of day. But many of those harms are still being perpetrated against people under this Title 42 expulsions policy that was initiated under the pretext of public health by the Trump administration, and has been adopted by the Biden administration, where over 1 million people have been expelled either back to Mexico or their home countries with no opportunity to express a fear of return. And we have issued calls to the administration. There was a letter earlier this week from over 1,000 physicians and other medical experts on how there is no public health basis for this policy, and calling for the end of Title 42 to re-establish asylum processing at the border. And I think I'll leave it at that, and then I can open it for questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Blaine, for that incredibly good explanation, and also slow enough for interpreters that didn't complain once, which is amazing. So thank you so much. I have a question. So obviously we know that the precedents are very important, but are there any efforts to include any kind of new legislation? We know legislation is complicated, always probably more than lawsuits, but legislation that will recognize gender, will recognize domestic violence, beyond what Marta will cover, which is the Violence Against Women Act. Is there a way to include that in the asylum system somehow?
Yes, so there are two efforts underway to try to codify a legal standard which would very clearly recognize women's claims under the particular social group ground, women as a social group, but also under the other grounds as well. So those two efforts there's a regulatory effort that I mentioned that is currently underway between the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, that was called for by President Biden in his executive order from February 2nd, that explicitly said we need regulations that better align the United States with our international obligations. with what the treaty requires. Because as I mentioned, our US domestic law, our statute is based on the treaty. So that would go a long way. It would address both the meaning of a particular social group, but also this other element of asylum, which is very, very difficult for women to prove, is what is known as the Nexus Element, or what was the reason why you were targeted? Right now, the standard for that is so difficult, so that even if a woman is recognized as a member of a protected group, which really shouldn't be at all controversial, it's clearly how societies organize themselves and have done for centuries. But it's just that you have to also show that the reason why you were targeted was because of your gender. And that can be very difficult the way that the standard is established now. So there are some fixes in the regulations that would hopefully make it just clearer and easier for applicants to show why they were being targeted without having to get into the mind of the persecutor, which is very difficult for most people. So that is another piece, and it doesn't mean women might be mentioned as in the drafting history as that was the intent behind why they're making some of these changes, because there are women's claims and a whole host of other claims that are currently have a real difficulty, including people who are fleeing gangs in Central America, that would have a lot of difficulty proving their claims under the current standards. And that often involves women as well, who are fleeing here with their children. The other effort that is underway is another introduction of the Refugee Protection Act, which has been, I don't know how many times it's been introduced at this point. Certainly, since at least since I started in this current role a decade ago. So there, and the Refugee Protection Act also has similar language to the regulations. I don't think there's much hope with Congress right now that it will happen, but it certainly is another way that we could ensure that women's claims are recognized and not vulnerable to future attacks by another Trump administration.
Thank you, Blaine. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to our second speaker. If you can stay around for more questions after, we'll appreciate it. So our second speaker is Marta Victoria Canossa. She's a lawyer, an immigration attorney in Los Angeles. We've known each other for a while. I did talk to her many times when writing about this topic because she has so many of these cases. Marta, Blaine was talking about women who are trying to come in the United States. Can you talk to us about women who are in the United States who don't have an immigration status, who are essentially vulnerable to just depending on their abuser? And what are the avenues for them? And then if you can tell us a little bit about the case of Milagro, who is a client of yours who's supposed to join us momentarily, we would appreciate that too. Welcome, bienvenida.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, I wanted to talk a little bit more in practical terms, right? As an attorney, what they do at CRS is amazing. We use their documents all the time and they're so helpful. And it's a great source of information and evidence that I think every woman applying for asylum should use. Every attorney with a client that it's applying for asylum based on domestic violence or based on the woman's inability to leave the relationship, because that is how we make our case during these days, should be going to CRS and getting those documents, because judges do look at them. I do, and they do take the information on those documents and all the reports that they offer as something that makes the case stronger. So for abused women seeking refuge in the United States, their options depend on where the domestic violence occurred. So if the domestic violence occurred in their home country, these women have the opportunity to seek asylum, withholding of removal, or protection under CAT, the Convention Against Torture, which is what was being spoken about before. For asylum, these abused women must apply for relief within the first year since they entered the United States. For withholding of removal is for those who did not apply for asylum within the first year since their entry. This form of relief has a higher standard, so it is important for immigrants fleeing domestic violence to meet that 1-year deadline for asylum, because withholding of removal doesn't take the abused woman to a residency, doesn't take them to a citizenship, but it is something that is left for when the women do not file for asylum within the first year since they enter. And then we have abused women have the option to apply for protection under the Convention Against Torture. For those that for some reason are not eligible for asylum or withholding, but who were victims of government agents or someone acting with the acquiescence of the government. So practically speaking, it is very difficult for an abused woman to go to an American embassy and request asylum or protection from the United States, even for those who have family already here in the United States, even for those who have parents already here in the United States, even for those who have application pendings, petition pendings. So this lack of resources at the embassy level contributes to the influx of women presenting their claim at the Mexican border. As I mentioned before, the Center for Gender Studies is a great place to get help for applicants who are seeking asylum. And as an immigration attorney who has handled dozens, if not hundreds of these type of asylum claims, something that I noticed has helped us is emphasize the text found in the country condition reports issued by the Department of State. Every year, the Department of State issues these country reports, and it helps us. These reports often highlight the problems that are faced by these abused women in their native country, and how many problems their native country has in enforcing and creating laws to protect them. So that's for women who suffer domestic violence outside the United States and are seeking refuge. Now, if the domestic violence occurred inside the United States, these women have two main options. They can file a self-petition through VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. That's what VAWA stands for. Or they can file a U visa application. VAWA was initially enacted it's been effective since 1994, and it has been of great help. It also helps men who are abused. It's not exclusive to women. So for any abused person, VAWA is a very good option, but it's only available to those married to legal permanent residents of the United States or citizens of the United States. So it's limited to spouses, to people who are married. Applicants are not required to have filed a police report and can support their case with with other types of evidence, like their own declarations, witness declarations, pictures, text messages. Witness statements are extremely useful in these cases. And this will be the recommended application for those eligible. So if I find a person who's married to a US citizen who was a victim of domestic violence, this will be my first, the to-go type of relief that I would recommend they file for, because it's much quicker than new visas and there's no quotas. So at this time though, it's taking from 21 to 28 months to get approved, these cases. But for immigration, when we talk about immigration and how the process goes, this is actually not a very long time. This is actually fast. But it's taking longer than before. I guess now 2 years is the wait time. Perhaps because of the pandemic, it got to be a little longer, but this is still a good option for clients and what we usually go for, because they can also apply for a work permit while they wait. It depends on what the attorney is. A very good idea for these women to try to seek the help of a non-profit organization, so they evaluate the case and see if it's a good idea to file a work permit at the same time as they file for a work permit, at the same time they file for a VAWA. It depends on the case. If it's a strong case, or if it's not a strong case, there's a little bit of strategy going on in those cases. But victims can apply for permanent legal status and be on the path to citizenship as soon as their VAWA application is approved. Like I said, they could even file their application for residency at the same time as their VAWA self-petition. An important practical point for VAWA applicants is that if applying for relief at the service level, at the immigration level, outside of court, the application must be filed while the person is still married to the abuser or within 2 years since their divorce. So applicants must understand that there is a deadline for these filings. Let's say someone does not file BAWA within 2 years since their divorce. At that point, what they will have is to request it from an immigration judge, which is a little harder, but it is still an option. It's something that we would like to avoid, but there is another option, doing something called cancellation of removal through BAWA at the immigration court level. This is something that sometimes attorneys forget that exists. And it is very useful because it allows women who have resided here for less than 10 years to still apply for a green card that way. Or if their children, even if they were not married to their US citizens, if they have children with that US citizen, they can still apply for relief in the court level through cancellation and removal. So if now moving to the U visa, the advantage of the U visa is that it is available to unmarried victims or victims of partners who have no legal status in the United States. So this is a good option for women who are victims of people who have no documents or who are not married to their US citizens, which, you know, it's very common. However, it requires a police report. So a police certification is required. And that is sometimes a challenge when the police doesn't want to cooperate. When the person is in a jurisdiction where the police doesn't want to cooperate, we're pretty much at the mercy of what the police wants to do and whether they want to issue that certification. And the big problem about the U visa is that it takes many years to get granted because there is a quota. So there cannot be, there is now a backlog of people that want the U visa and cannot get it because they're just in line. So right now it's about 5 years. I haven't checked lately, but yeah, it just keeps going up. So that's why BAWA is better because it's faster. There is no wait time. But U visa it eventually gets there. So it's an option that women, victims of abuse should consider to try to stay and legalize their status in the United States. Another, I guess another difficulty of the U visa is that the woman won't have a work permit while they wait. They say they were gonna change that recently, a few months ago, but practically speaking, it's still not happening. But it's still highly recommended, a U visa for anybody who's been abused. There is this avenue and there is this type of help, and we just have to be patient when we file this.
We have several questions, Marta, if you want.
Sure.
Are you done? Are you done explaining?
Yes,
All the, okay.
for the most part, yes.
Okay, maybe you, some of these questions we'll get to the stuff that's left. Okay, we have a question here from Anhana Nagara. I can see your, I'm sorry, I can't see your full name, but Anhana, do you want to ask your question? Can you unmute Anhana? Hello, hello. Okay, I'm going to ask the question then. It says, how does BAWA work between family court and immigration court? If a woman has children and fighting custody in family court, but then also applying for immigration through BAWA in immigration court, would imagine those are separate, completely separate, right, Marta?
Yeah, they're completely different things. They're completely separate. What happens with BAWA is actually confidential, unless the person wants to disclose it. But yeah, it's confidential. It shouldn't affect what happens in family court. Now, sometimes we use what happens in family court to support their BAWA claims. Usually we try to use it when it helps our clients. But yeah, they're completely different proceedings.
Okay, Marta, I am going to move on to Milagro because she joined and I don't want her to wait. And
Great,
then we'll
hello
go-
Milagro.
And then we will go to questions. Hola Milagro, bienvenida, ¿cómo estás? Tienes que quitar el mudo, el mute, para que te podamos oír. Ok,
Ahí
perfecto.
está. Ajá.
Perfecto. Perfecto. Okay, look, what we're going to do here, I'm going to direct the questions both in English and Spanish to Milagro, and then she'll respond in Spanish. And Marta, you're going to do the translation for us in English? Okay. Good.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Milagro, bienvenida. Gracias por estar aquí. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. Please do not use her last name. Just use her first name. Por favor, no usen su apellido, solamente su nombre, su primer nombre. Eso es lo que ella solicita. Milagro, ¿cuándo viniste a este país y por qué viniste? ¿Qué escapaste? ¿Qué tipo de situación tenías allá?
So when did you
Bueno,
come to the United States and why did you come to the United States?
ok, yo vine en el 2015, diciembre. Vine porque me secuestraron en mi país y luego yo logré escapar, pero aún así seguían buscándome.
Okay,
Entonces
I
mi
came
vida
on
peligraba.
December 2015 to this country. In December of 2015, I came because I was kidnapped, but then I was able to escape.
Sí, adelante, Milagro.
Y luego, pues mi vida peligraba siempre. Puse una denuncia, pero pues mi caso no fue resuelto, no me ayudaron en nada. Entonces yo
My
tuve
life was
que,
in danger all the time. I denounced what happened to me. I placed a complaint, but nothing happened. No one helped me.
Milagro, ¿quién te secuestró? Who kidnapped you?
era un pandillero activo de la Mara 18.
A gang
Mhm.
member kidnapped me. He was an active member of the 18th Street Gang.
Y ¿tú tenías una relación con esa persona?
No, yo tenía a mi novio con el que me iba a casar, pero como ellos son de que dice, si yo le gusto a esa persona, entonces ellos como que sienten que tienen autoridad sobre uno como mujer de elegir, no,
Did
tú
you
vas
have
a ser
I'm
mía.
sorry, Eli, did you have a relationship with him? No, I didn't. I had my own boyfriend, but they have the mentality that if I want a woman, I'm gonna have that woman.
Sí, disculpa,
Entonces-
tenemos que cortar para poder hacer la
Sí,
traducción.
sí,
Sí.
disculpen ustedes también. Entonces, él decía, si tú no eres mía, no vas a ser de nadie, me gustas y vas a ser mía por las buenas o por las malas.
So he will say, if you're not mine, you're not gonna be anyone else's. You're gonna be mine. Either you're gonna be mine, whether you like it or not.
Y pues fue lo que pasó, porque yo nunca hice caso a lo que él me decía, no lo creí capaz, la verdad no lo creí capaz, pero pues lo peor vino después.
So I didn't think he was capable of doing that, but that's what happened. And the worst thing happened afterwards.
Sí, adelante.
Y-
María.
Y llegó el momento en el que él empezó a amenazarme, consiguió mi número de teléfono.
It
A
got to a
decirme
point where he
cosas.
started threatening me. He got my phone number.
Y luego como acosarme demasiado hasta a llegar al punto de decirme, si no eres mía, yo mato a tu abuelita, que es la que me crió.
He started harassing me a lot. And then he told me, if you're not mine, I'm going to kill your grandmother.
Y ese día fue lo que empezó para mí, porque yo tuve que acceder a lo que él quería por la vida de mi abuelita y por mi vida también.
So that's when it all started. I had to go on with what he wanted because I had to save my grandmother's life and my own life.
Y pues me tuve que ir con él
I had to go with him.
y ese día pues me violó, me amenazó
day
con
he
una
raped me.
pistola
threatened me with a gun.
Y me dijo de que pues él me había dicho de que si no eran las buenas iba a ser las malas.
And he told me that he had warned me that it was going to happen whether I wanted it or not.
Y pues ahí estuve, me golpeó, me violó como él quiso, hizo lo que él quiso conmigo. Y
I
así fue.
was there. He raped me however he wanted to. He did with me whatever he wanted to do.
Y así pasó varios meses, pasé con eso. Me golpeaba, me violaba las veces que él quería.
And that's how it happened. Several months. He raped me whenever he wanted to. He hit me whenever he wanted to.
Y pues ya la última vez que me golpeó por 4 horas. Me quería matar, me dijo que me iba a cortar en pedacitos.
The last time he hit me for about 4 hours. He wanted to kill me. He told me he was going to cut me into pieces.
Me quemó con una plancha de ropa.
He burned me with an iron.
Me golpeó mi rostro.
He hit me in the face.
Mis manos me las dislocó.
Dislocated my hands.
Y pues, no sé, gracias a Dios pude salir y pedir ayuda, pero pues.
Thanks to the Lord, I was able to escape and ask for help, but.
Pero la verdad, él me siguió, yo no lo creo que esté viva todavía porque él lo que quería era matarme. Y me dijo de que pues la cabeza le iba a dejar en la puerta de mi mamá, de mi abuelita, perdón, la otra mitad del cuerpo en el circo donde mi tío y la otra mitad del cuerpo en el otro circo donde mi tío. Entonces él eso era lo que quería.
He followed me. I cannot believe I'm still alive. He told me he was going to leave my head at the door of at my grandmother's house door. And he was going to leave one part of my body at one of my uncle's circus. And he was going to leave the other part of my body in another circus. His family members worked at a circus. So that's why she's talking about the circus.
Sure. Yeah. Milagro, so thank you so much for sharing that with us. Muchas gracias por compartir esto con nosotros para que entendamos realmente cómo son estas situaciones en la vida real, for us to understand that what women like you go through. ¿Te escapaste y luego viniste a Estados Unidos y cómo fue que pediste asilo?
Me escapé, duré un tiempo allá, pero él seguía buscándome y después de eso yo me vine para acá, crucé y les dije yo a ellos que peligraba por mi vida, yo luché.
I escaped, but he kept looking for me. So then I had to come here. And then when I came here, I told them that I was fleeing for my life.
No es fácil, pero gracias a Dios, luchando, gracias también a la abogada, pues lo logré pero sí fue una larga lucha, la verdad, y pues
It was not easy. It was not easy. It was a long battle, and thanks to my attorney and yes, I just had to say everything.
Pero pues gracias a Dios ya estoy aquí y luchar porque yo no quería regresar, porque si yo regresaba me iban a matar, donde yo estuviera, él me buscaba. Entonces
Thanks
yo
to
todo
God,
eso,
I'm here, and I fought to stay here because if I had been deported, he would have killed me.
entonces yo todo eso lo dije desde que entré.
Milagro, tú te presentaste en la frontera y pediste asilo ahí mismo en la frontera.
Sí,
You got to the
sí.
border and you asked for asylum at the border.
Sí.
Yes, I said everything when I came in.
Una pregunta para Marta. Marta, a question for you. you told me before that if she had gotten to the United States later than she did, when the Trump administration was already changing all of these processes, she would not have gotten asylum at this point.
Actually, if we had done the hearing a year ago, her case would be denied. It's just all the hearings that happened during the most of them, since matter of AB came into effect, most of them got denied. So I'm pretty sure that if her hearing had happened last year, it would have been denied. So it's not really, doesn't have to do when she entered. It happened when the hearing happened, when the laws what laws were in effect when we went to court.
Milagro, tú lograste tu asilo. Milagro, you were able to get your asylum?
Sí, bendito Dios, y gracias a Dios también con la abogada, sí, lo logré.
Yeah, I was able to win my asylum. Thanks to that, I was able to win my asylum.
Y ahora estás bien. Creo que tienes una hija, tienes otro hijo en camino. Now
Sí.
you're good. You have a daughter, and you are also pregnant.
Gracias a Dios, sí estoy bien, tengo mi bebé, pero aún existe ese temor y existe ese trauma que uno no se lo puede quitar. Aunque esté muy lejos, pero eso es una herida, es como una quemada grande y queda cicatriz, y aunque uno quiera borrarla, no se puede. Bendito Dios, estoy con alguien que sí, pues me valora, me quiere, pero los recuerdos existen aún.
Thanks to the Lord, I'm doing well now. Yes, I have my daughter, but what happened to me was very traumatic, and it's a scar, and it's as if I was burned, and the scar is still there, and I'm still afraid. Yes. Thanks.
Milagro, muchas gracias por compartir tu historia con nosotros. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Sí.
Si quieres,
Sí, de
si
nada.
te quedas unos minutos, por favor, a ver si hay preguntas de alguien más.
Okay.
Gracias.
Sí,
Okay, guys, thank you, Marta. Thank you so much. We have some questions in the chat. So Seema Gupta asked a very interesting question. Seema, do you want to ask your question about independent? Okay, so this is all available. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Seema. Seema is asking, so all of this is available only to women, or is it independent of the victim's sex?
It's available to men as well.
And are there many cases that you know of men?
Asylum cases, I haven't had one case for men, but for VAWA cases, I've had several cases. And for U visa cases, I've had several cases, yes. And they get granted if they are supported with evidence and the abuse existed. Yes, it's available for men.
Thank you. Henrietta, yeah, we know her last name is showing, not anymore, she changed it, but do not use her last name, everyone, okay? Just her first name. Thank you. Okay. Well, okay, Oni, ask your question, please. Oni Advincula, ask your question.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Pilar. What happens if, let's say, the process of immigration, the person, the applicant, his or her immigration status expired, because some of this litigation could actually take years. Does that get an extension, like a temporary extension for the applicant while waiting?
Most people get a work permit. Well, not most people. Some people get a work permit while they wait. There was some legal action because the courts, there were problems on how they were issuing those work permits. Ideally, everybody should have a work permit while they wait for asylum, but it's not possible. Maybe half the people have a work permit. So it pretty much depends on the judge who they get. It's a very, in my opinion, unfair process, because it depends on the judge As immigration attorneys, we know with which judges clients are more likely to get a work permit while they wait. And so some of them will have a work permit, some of them will not.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, many of these women don't have a legal status, which is why they need to resort to this visas, right? Marta?
For asylums, yes, most of the women that apply for asylum is because they were apprehended. So they're doing it because they have to go through it. For VAWA and U visa applicants, as I explained before, it depends on how they want to process the case. But for VAWAs, they have access to a work permit while they wait. For U visas, they're trying to change that, but as of now, they don't have a work permit while they wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, Araceli, ask your question, please. Araceli Martinez.
Somebody asked how long it took for this case to be granted. It took about 5 years. 5 years since she got here. She got here in 2015 and the case was granted a few months ago.
Yeah, that was mean, to figure it out how many years passed since she applied for asylum until the day that she finally get it. And also if you have some numbers that show us how many women have benefits from VAWA in the last year.
Maybe Blaine knows. Oh,
We can look up the numbers. I won't have them off the top of my head. I'm not sure if we can find them. There is a way to find how much asylums are granted in general, which is a very low number, and you can even see how many asylums each judge grants. There is a way to see that, but specifically for VAWA, yes, I will have to research it. For this case, Milagro, she arrived in the United States in December of 2015. She filed an application for asylum. 15, December 15.
Okay, 15.
She filed her application for asylum before the immigration judge in December of 2016 because she needed to find an attorney, she needed to settle, so it took her. Fortunately, she did it within the first year because, you know, if you don't file within the first year, you may have issues. And then her case was finally granted in August of this year.
I have a question for Blaine. Blaine, have you seen, I mean, as you mentioned in your presentation, the domestic violence and violence against women went up during the pandemic, and we've done briefings on that. Have you seen that in the people who are coming in the last year? Are there any numbers or any anecdotal evidence that we can point to saying that more people are showing up because of this issue, more women are showing up because of abuse and violence?
Yeah, it's very difficult, I think, to get a complete picture because the government does not track the types of asylum claims, you know, the grounds why someone is applying. They don't even always capture the sex of the applicant, you know, on a consistent basis. So it is very difficult. I think from, you know, anecdotally from our understanding, you know, this is not new claims because, as I said, very, very few people are actually having the opportunity to claim asylum at the border anymore. But, you know, certainly in conversations with people who are, you know, working at the border and talking with, you know, women, that, you know, gender violence is certainly top of the list for one of the, you know, it's often interlocking reasons why people flee, but certainly one of the reasons why women are leaving.
Blaine, also you mentioned that you have the organization has multilingual capacity. I wanted to know what are the trends and how, because we've mostly talked about Central American women, and we also have women from the African diaspora, AAPI women, or men. Not sure if that's if there's a lot of men in this category, but have you seen also precedents that affect them, or those also the same precedents can be applied to people from those geographic areas?
Yes, I think with the AB decision and other decisions from the Trump era, certainly had an impact on women feeling domestic violence or other gender violence from any country. So we saw, judges applying that decision in women's claims, no matter where they were from. There is a certain, there's a certain type of discrimination against claims coming to our southern border. But certainly, yes, we saw that decision applied across the board. In terms of men's claims, we have seen some same-sex cases involving domestic violence where, that have been successful or that, might have been, undermined. But I would say all claims involving people fleeing what are known as, private actors or non-state actors, which is often the case, just as in women's cases involving gender violence, also in sexual orientation or gender identity-based violence, they're also often targeted by non-state actors, their families or their communities, and those claims also were at risk and looked at with some additional skepticism by some judges under that Trump era precedent.
Thank you. Milagro, tengo una pregunta aquí para ti de una reportera. I have a question here for Milagro, and I'm going to ask the question, Henrietta, okay? This is a question from Henrietta Burrows. Milagro, ella quiere saber si tú has estado en contacto con tu familia en tu país y con tu abuela, por ejemplo, y si hubo algún tipo de revancha por haberte ido contra tu familia. Quita el mudo para que te podamos oír.
Sí, yo tengo contacto con ellos, pero como ellos tienen circo, se mueven de lugar a lugar. Y sí, él ha tratado como de buscarnos o de, más que todo a mí. Entonces, él le llama a ellos, pregunta, no sé cómo consigue números de teléfono, pero la verdad sí ha tratado de comunicarse, incluso conmigo por medio de Facebook. Entonces, siempre él insiste.
Yeah.
Yes, he has communicated with them. My family has work and they have a circus, so they move around. But yes, I have no idea how he finds their number, but he finds it. But he wants to find me, and he asks about me, even through Facebook. He's asking for me.
Final question. La última pregunta, final question. Milagro, está bien, ya no más preguntas para ti. Muchas gracias. No more questions for you, Milagro. Thank you. For Marta and for Blaine, there's a strong move to punish women who fight back or women who want abortion, for example. Do our speakers feel there's a strong support for expanding asylum for women victims?
I think that our laws as they exist now do protect women who are asserting their rights or active in political movements that could be for persecution based on their gender or also based on their political opinion for the types of positions that they're taking in response to policies of the state. So I think our laws as they exist now would protect women in the circumstances that you just mentioned. And
Marta,
should protect women in those. Yeah, they do and they should, in my view. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Blaine. You, Marta, final words on that, maybe?
Do I think there is a movement at this point? It's been very slow. I'm sure Ms. Blaine can see that it's so slow. And I guess, I mean, ideally, I would like to say that yes, there is a movement, but I think that we need to, there needs to be more cases. And I've noticed actually that some TAs actually, that we call trial attorneys, the government attorneys, TAs, sometimes they grant the case. And I wonder, why did they just grant this? Why didn't they fight this case? So maybe because they don't want to expand it, because then there's going to be another actual, for example, this case, it was not, the way we win cases is because at CG, at the University of Hastings, they create these cases. And then so now we have these laws that we can use to protect our clients. But the case they have says that women unable to leave the relationship, Guatemalan women unable to leave the relationship, that's like what CDRS says. are the ones that are protected. And so those women can get refuge, those women. And when they don't fit, my client, Milagro, didn't fit that specific group of people, then you pray to expand it. She was not married. There were factors that were not the same, but the government said, okay, that's okay, we'll grant it. So the movement is slow, and we just need to, it is hard. As an immigration attorney, I think that it is hard, and I think that we need more support, because just doing it at the court level and trying to expand the law is too slow. We really need, women, feminists, women who are in these groups to actually see that these other women also need help, and start speaking up, and hopefully BAWA can be expanded and other laws can be created, because it is too slow the way it's going.
So what you're saying, Marta, is that the feminist movement in the United States has not really helped?
It hasn't helped. No, it hasn't helped immigrant women, victims of domestic violence. It hasn't. It hasn't helped them. We're still in this. I mean, the CGRS is trying. All these places are trying. Clinic, all these other places are trying, but it's too slow. We actually need we need actually laws that will be more clear, because right now we're trying to expand the what the meaning of a particular social group is and what political opinion is, and that just moves too slowly, because there are forces that are keeping it from moving it, like the government, like when they give up a case, and so we cannot expand the law, but we want to win the case, so it's okay, but so it's too slow. So yes, we need laws. We need laws at the higher level. We need a reform that will protect them. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marta. Thank you so much, Blaine. Sandy, you want to say a few words before we close?
This is a very important call to action, especially to all of us who are women. That's the very important takeaway. Thank you to all three of our speakers.
Thank you. Gracias.